Is number 19 on the agenda, excise tax administration issues. And we have a memo. Mr. Fanning, if you're gonna be you're up, and I think take us through this memo, and then there is a corresponding bill draft that we'll kind of go over and talk about how do we want to. But I think I'd like us to, I don't know, my thoughts were maybe not to work this bill today, just because it's. And so maybe we do this, maybe you go through an issue and then you point us out in the bill where this fix is at for it, and then we can take notes on this bill and then kind of ponder that and work. And who knows, maybe we can get to the end of this, say, hey, we like this bill, let's just all vote aye. We'll see, I just don't know. And so you have everybody has a copy of that. It was at the top of your desk, Department of Revenue, and we'll just work through that. So as kind of the spreadsheet at the front, it's what it looks like on the front. Members. Okay, and that's up at the front of your desk up there. Okay, so that's what, and then it's on your electronic version as well. So I think we're getting there. Okay.
So, yeah. So Mr. Chairman, 24 LSO 226. So if you remember at our meeting up in Sheridan, the department had provided a list of a number of items related to the administration of the sales tax. And the committee directed staff to work with the department to kind of put together a bill draft so we could see, what those changes might look like. So I did work with the department. We kind of put this together. So after each change, you'll see a staff comment referencing what item in that initial list that was intended to address. So kind of as you go through the bill draft, you can go kind of item by item and see how that changed related to that initial document that the department had provided.
Tell me what you think would be most efficient, just to work this bill page by page, and then we can flip in our memo, and then Mr. Fanning can kind of explain the memo that he's brought to us. Would that work best, you think?
That's fine with me. Is that okay with you?
Okay, so we'll work the bill through the bill and we'll flip back and forth pages of the memo. Okay, so go ahead. We'll just get started on this.
So, Mr. Chairman, then the first change on page 2, the definition of vendor. You'll see it adds a new sentence stating that a person is not in the business of selling, if selling tangible personal property, admissions, or services which are subject to taxation under this article is not a habitual or regular activity of the person. You'll see that was referenced under item 10 on that initial list, and Brett, Mr. Fanning can fill you in more.
Okay, so item 10, I'm flipping to it. Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brett Fanning. I'm the excise tax administrator here at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And I do think this is a pretty efficient way to kind of navigate this bill, just to go through it so I can outline some of these points that I was directed to review back in our June meeting. So number 10, our tax administration issue is related to this vendor licensing thresholds. And basically here, what we're trying to do is, does the legislature intend for the department to visit garage sales and lemonade stands and kind of those like businesses? Now, right now, it's really just a director decision. And so there's nothing in statute that says that we shouldn't go to these garage sales, lemonade stands. But this is where here, the department's trying to get clarification. Now, if the legislature does want us to go to garage sales, lemonade stands, okay, that's obviously a policy decision. But if that is not the case, the language that we worked with LSO here is taken from one of our exemption statutes related to the religious and charitable organization. So this, if it's not a habitual or regular activity, this is something that we could promulgate rules and say, hey, this doesn't apply to garage sales, lemonade stands. Now, as you can see, when I'm discussing this, I am stopping at those two. I haven't gone so far as to reference craft shows and kind of those like businesses, because then you bring in rodeos, other craft shows that we visit almost every single weekend throughout the state. So this habitual one says, hey, if you're just going to do it, it's a one-off time. In the exemption statute, in the charitable section, it says an occasional vendor. And in our rules, we have something that's 4 or less times. Okay, so with this language in here, we can say, hey, you don't have to, if you're a garage sale or you're a lemonade stand, you don't have to license with us. There's this exemption, but then we still protect, if that's the legislature's intent, Cheyenne Frontier Days, your big rodeos, kind of all of those. So that was the intent behind this legislative administration issue number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is going to kind of seem silly, but it really is a serious question. So if my kids run a lemonade stand, if they do it 5 times, then they're going to be subject because they have a limit of 4 times. Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, the answer to that is yes, but that is a rule that the department has in place. So if there is updated language here, that is something we can look at on the rules side with the department.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's keep rolling now. We're on to page 3. So that's number 10. I put good and put a check mark by that. So make your notes, members, as we work through this.
So the next
Okay.
one, Mr. Chairman, 3915-103, page 3, this deletes a sentence. This is on the imposition of the tax. And it basically says that if you are
Yeah.
being admitted for free or at a reduced rate to these types of amusements, entertainment, recreation, games, or athletic events, that they would still have to collect the tax on that free ticket. And so this would strike that, and that's item 18 in the topics list.
Yeah, I wrote good already on this one. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I am good with good if you are. The tax administration piece here is you've got varying ticket price levels. What's the amount of tax they've got to accrue on, just kind of those details. But these things do happen. I actually have one as a bookmark right here. Free admission to a circus if you're under 12 years of age. But how do you track that if you're letting people in for free?
Yeah. Okay, very good.
Next one, Mr. Chairman, subparagraph J on top of page 4. That was referencing 18, and it was sort of related to item 13, which we'll get to in a little while. Just on another imposition question we'll get to in a little while. Subparagraph J, this is related to the sales. Again, this is imposition of the tax. The sales price paid for services performed, it would strike for the repair, alteration, or improvement of, and add on tangible personal property. It's item 3 in the initial list.
Assistant Director.
Thank you.
Director of that division, right?
There you go.
There
Yes,
you go.
administrator.
Director.
Thank you,
Administrator.
Mr. Chairman.
Gotcha.
The intent here is trying to gain clarification on, does the legislature intend for any service or labor to be taxable if it's performed on tangible personal property? So the 3 words there, repair, alteration, or improvement, they do lead to some sort of ambiguity there. Does it include everything? Does it have to increase value of the tangible personal property? So this, with LSO's help here, it's just clarifying that any services done on tangible personal property. If that is the direction of the legislature, is it your intent that you want any work done on tangible personal property be subject to sales tax? Now, the department had traditionally almost always said this was subject to sales tax if you were working on tangible personal property. But then there's been some guidance recently that's kind of put that into question. So here, this is just the bill draft that we worked with Mr. Anderson on, but it is subject, that's a policy decision, and it's just a clarification point right there.
Very good. Questions? Okay, on to the next.
So next one, Mr. Chairman, subparagraph K, this is dealing with taxes on an oil or gas well site. And you'll see the change there. Basically it would specify that the provisions of 3915-105, which is the exemptions, except for 3915-105A-7B shall not apply to this subparagraph. That was item 15 of the initial list. And turn that over to Mr. Fanning.
Go ahead, Administrator.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, so this is one, I know you're making checks, goods, and maybe additional clarification. This is one where there may be some discussion with the committee. And so the reason I say that is because oil field sales tax is very complicated. It's just so complicated. And throughout the years, the legislature really has tried to clarify that. There have been some certain different triggers throughout the years, even in my tenure. And the department's question for the legislature is, did you intend for the well site to be this special, unique zone of taxation for sales tax? And if that's the case, then the language that was added on page 5, lines 5 through 6 says, hey, it's the special place except for one exemption. And that is the exemption for labor done at a well site before some of those taxable triggers start. And so that's the department's question. Oil field taxation, it's been questions long before I've been here, and it'll be questions long after. But if it is the legislature's intent that it's this unique special zone of taxation, then this is what that language intends to do. If that's not the case, then it is something worth reviewing going forward.
Okay, any questions, members? So the proposed changes that you have on page 5 and 6 of the bill bring in the 3915-105, except for paragraph A-7B. So 3915-105 again is, just say it again so I understand it. What is that exactly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that is our 3915-105 include all of our sales tax exemptions, except for paragraph 7B. So that what that would do is it says, hey, if you're working in the taxable phase at the well site, that anything you do out there is sales taxable, any time, any labor, any service. Now, if that's the intent, and that was the way we traditionally always administered it. But now we're getting questions and a lot of these, and Director Henson wanted me to make sure and reference this, is a lot of this is to minimize confusion and to minimize litigation and all of those questions. So that's the intent here. If with this proposed language, it says the well site is this unique zone of taxation where there's only one exemption. All other time, labor, materials that are used at the well site, those are taxable in the taxable phase. And I can further muddy the water if you want, but I'd prefer not to with well site
I think that's
sales
good. And then
taxation.
that paragraph 7 then is the labor before production starts.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman,
I
correct.
think I got it. I just had to hear it twice. Okay, any other questions, member? Representative Block.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just making sure it's clear, and I'm sorry, I'm just learning here, but so this actually makes some things taxable that were not taxable before. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, the answer to that is yes, but it's not right now. It is administered per this language. That is how it is administered just based on department rules and clarification. So We administer it based on this writing right here, but we've started to get more questions.
Good. Okay, next.
Next one, Mr. Chairman, subparagraph P on the bottom of page 5. This is related to specified digital products. So currently, the statute would read that a sale of specified digital products is only subject to the tax if the purchaser has permanent use of the specified digital product. This would change that to say, and it would include the sales price paid for access to specified digital products through a streaming or subscription service that does not provide the purchaser with permanent use of the specified digital product. And that is item 5 in the department topic list.
Or, okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, yes, you have.
This is
This,
number 5, right? In your chart.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and so digital products, it has been in front of the legislature before. And the intent here, or the clarification that we're looking for, is if you go to a movie theater and you watch a movie, that is sales taxable in Wyoming. If you rent a movie from a video rental place, that is also sales taxable. But if you rent that same movie via an online platform, you don't have permanent use of it, and that is not taxable. So is it the legislature's intent that if you watch the same movie in different formats, that it's not taxable? Now, this definition here, and it's all keyed on permanent use. It really is. And permanent use is something that the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board discusses routinely. It's a permanent use type thing. This language here references, okay, if you're going to stream, in addition to download something, that should be, or that's taxable. That's the clarification we're asking here. Does the legislature intend that if you review the same movie or TV shows in different formats, that all those are taxed differently? That's the clarification we're seeking here.
What's the streamlined sales tax? I mean, what's their guidance on this for us as a streamlined sales tax state?
Mr. Chairman, excellent question. So as long as we adhere to their definitions related to digital products, which we have in statute right now, then the streamline agreement says, hey, you can do what you want as long as you have our definitions. So there are states that tax these items. There are, but they've got to have the same streamlined definitions per the agreement. Prior to this meeting, in an attempt to be proactive, I reached out to Streamline and said, hey, this is the language that's in a bill draft. What do you think? And I haven't heard back yet. So if this were something the legislature wanted to do, we would need to make sure we have the language as approved by the Streamlined Sales Tax Agreement.
So if you, and I think I understand, I mean, you gave the example of movies, but let's go to like television at home. If you have a cable box, you're paying tax on that every month. But if you have streaming television, you're not.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to clarify that. It's partly true. If you are watching TV at home, generally there's not going to be sales tax on that in Wyoming. We don't have an imposition statute for the TV show. Now you're going to see tax most likely on your bill, but it's a small amount. You're being charged sales tax on the rental of your little box. So we don't have an imposition statute for TV shows as well. It's not specifically outlined in here, but that is true. You are correct in that aspect.
Representative Swanson.
Thanks. I need some clarification then, Mr. Chairman. So if I have a Netflix subscription where I pay to watch as many movies as I want every month, those are not taxable. But if I go to the movie theater and watch 8 movies in a row, each one of those movies at the movie theater is taxable right now. And how would this change with this language?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swanson, correct. Yes, and the hook there's two hooks really. We have an imposition statute for the sales price paid for any place of amusement, movie theaters. So we have that as taxable. The Netflix portion of it gets into our digital tax and our digital goods statutes, which say you have to get permanent use of those. So if you are able to download them, some subscription services allow that, then there would be a taxable event. But if you can't download them and they disappear from your account in a month or so or a year, then that's not taxable. Correct.
Just to follow up, the change that's being requested does what from what we're doing now? Or is it just clarifying kind of what we're doing is what we're doing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wanser, this is a change. This is different than clarification. That's why it is our question to the legislature is, did you know is one part, and what is the intent? Do you want all these to be taxed the same way? So yes, this is one, Mr. Chairman, so you're good and yes and no down your list. This is probably one that has another discussion point on it as well. Because it does include taxation at different levels and possibly things that aren't being taxed right now that could in the future.
So I think if we had the owner of movie theater here, he'd say, yeah, it's unfair competition. And if you had the owner of the streaming services say, hey, this is free enterprise, you got, we're new. And so I don't know, that's something we're gonna have to settle with. So, okay. Any other questions? Senator Ide has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does, I guess where I don't understand is how you police that, and does that add to administrative costs to, make everybody compliant, and how do you make them compliant? How does staff deal with that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, outstanding observation. Right now, we do not have a lot of these streaming companies licensed with us. They don't need to. That we don't have an imposition statute for them, and they're not, unless there's a download for permanent use, we don't have them licensed. So if it were the intention of the legislature to get them licensed, then they become a normal vendor and we'll educate them as best we can. This is not really something that's an administrative burden to the department, right? So in sales tax, completely different than what we've been talking about for the past 2 days. A lot of the burdens fall on the vendors to collect the right amount of tax and send it on your behalf. So if this were to go through, okay, you make a movie download or a movie rental taxable, then it's on that streaming service, again, with the department's help and education to send in the tax on your behalf.
Mr. Fanning, how many states then are that tax streaming? Do most of them?
Mr. Chairman, it's mixed. I do know there are streamlined states that tax streaming. And then, so you've got 45 states with sales tax, and I can do additional research to pinpoint that number for you. The answer I have today in front of me is I know there are states that tax streaming. West Virginia pops into mind, but I know that there are others that tax this as well.
I go back to when we started taxing online sales tax. We were, I don't know, seemed like we were one of the last states to do it. And it was such an unfair thing. Finally, it came around to the mom and pops on the street who have to collect that extra 4, 5, 6%, and the online didn't at that time. So that's been a change, been a huge deal. I think everybody agrees that was the right thing to do. I think we're I think we'd like to learn a little more. How many states are we the last outlier? Out of the 46 sales tax states that you mentioned. Okay, very good. What's next? What do we got?
So next, Mr. Chairman, on page 6 and over to page 7, these are exemptions now. In subparagraph E, sales of power or fuel, it used to say to a person engaged in the transportation business. Now it would say transporting tangible personal property by railroad or pipeline. And this was item 4 on the department topic list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is another legislative intent question. So if you read the original language, sales of power or fuel to a person engaged in the transportation business when the same is consumed directly in generating motive power for actual transportation purposes, except for motor fuel that's used on the highways. So we get a bunch of questions. What does this exactly mean? And a lot of the questions stem from in the transportation business, because there's an argument out there that everyone may be able to claim this exemption, depending on how you look at it. And so the department had traditionally administered this for railroad and pipelines. So if you are using power to transport those items, that was used for the actual transportation because it was consumed by those, I'm not going to say vehicles, but those avenues, then you were entitled to an exemption. So is it the legislature's intent? The language that Mr. Anderson has come up with was how the department had administered it. Is it your intent that in the transportation business means a lot more or a lot less? And so that's kind of our question.
Okay, thank you. Next.
So the next one, Mr. Chairman, going over to page 8, then another exemption for the sales price of admission to, and it used to say, and user fees for county or municipal owned recreation facilities. This strikes that, and this was item 13 in the department list.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one is fascinating to me, just in general. So if you look at our imposition statute, it says the sales price of admission for places of amusement, recreation facilities, etc. Well, then there is an exemption in our statutes, and you can see it right there in my memo, that has the exact same language, but adds and user fees to these county and municipally owned facilities. So was it the legislature's intent? So right now you have an exemption without an imposition statute, and that's a little wonky in sales tax statutes. And so was it the legislature's intent that user fees should be taxable? And when I say user fees, that's green fees to your golf course, ski lift tickets, your local bowling alleys, roller skating rinks. And so it's just a clarification question for the department and for our vendors. If you have an exemption to certain facilities, is there an imposition in there? And so that's a question as well. Again, if user fees were meant to be taxable, and I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, we administer them as not taxable. Okay, we administer them as not taxable. But if they were, why is there an exemption in there? And so that's our question for the legislature.
So in the exemption statute, so let's just say you have a user fee at a private golf course.
Right now,
Pay sales tax on it.
Mr.
No.
Chairman, right now, there would be no sales tax on any green fees in the state of Wyoming. That's how we administer it. But yes, let's go back to where you're going with that. That is correct. If this exemption were to go in and you were to add user fees to the imposition statute, that would be correct. If you played golf at a city-owned course, it may have a different taxable consequence, not the right word, a taxable event than a privately owned.
Yeah, question, Representative Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have these facilities. We went out and taxed people to get the money to build the facilities, and we call it a service we provide. And I just want to make sure I understand what we're saying here. if they go to use the facility and there's a fee involved, we're looking at taxing them on the fee to use it or not, or am I missing something? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, so no, what this would do, so, and this is, and you'll see I referenced, back on page 3, when we were on the imposition, if you do want to impose a tax on user fees, you would want to go back, to page 3 and add that in there. This just clarifies that because the tax isn't imposed on user fees anyway, we would strike it here, so that it just doesn't cause any confusion. Basically.
Okay.
So it's just
So
to
this-
clarify.
It's been raising taxes.
This
I
is,
mean,
yeah, this
just
isn't
cleaning
imposing
up.
it. It's not getting rid of any exemption. It's just removing the ambiguity, because then it would potentially imply that maybe user fees should be taxed with this language in there. But they are currently not taxed. So that's all the intent is, just to clean this up.
Okay, we have a question. Who has a question?
Oh, I do.
Representative
Chairman.
Wallitzer.
We're currently engaging in a state shooting sports complex, which would assumedly be a state-owned recreational facility. That, do we need to be, I don't know if we have any other state-owned, just not county or municipal, but what happens if it's I don't think we have any special district recreation facilities, but we could. Or a swimming pool, we could certainly have a special district swimming pool. How do you do that now, and should we enlarge this statute, or is it taken care of somewhere else?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zawantzer. So right now, the shooting range or the swimming pool would not be administered as taxable, not taxable. And so it would be up to the legislature's decision if you wanted to move forward.
But this change on page 8 kind of clarifies that it will not be taxable. It doesn't raise the tax. It clarifies that user fees will not be taxable. So I'm gonna put a check mark and a good beside that one. Okay, very good. Thank you. I think we were all a little bit, I think we got it now. Okay, next.
All right, next up, Mr. Chairman, bottom of page 8 and over to page 9, this is the exemption for the sale or use of sale or lease of machinery used in manufacturing. It just strikes out 2 of the qualifiers for that. And that was item 12 in the department list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The manufacturing exemption is one of the hardest ones for the department to manage, administer, educate our vendors on. So it says you can purchase manufacturing machinery without sales tax until this sunset hits. There's 2 qualifiers in here that make it very hard for the department to do. And so I remember that this discussion comes up from time to time. So the first one is removing, now again, clarifying here, we do not, and it's not the department's place either. We're not looking at removing the manufacturing exemption. Okay, that is nothing along those lines. What this change does is it removes these 2 qualifiers. So I'll just go through it briefly and then I'll explain. So if you remove the 2 qualifiers, this exemption says, hey, if you are going to purchase machinery and you're going to be building something new, you get a sales tax exemption. That's what this change that Mr. Anderson has worked up would do. Right now, there's 2 qualifiers in there to get this exemption. The first one is you've got to have this NAICS code that's a manufacturing portion of it. As you can see in my memo, this one's tough because a lot of times manufacturers don't know their own NAICS code, and I'm not stereotyping, it's just true. And that's not a good or bad thing, but sometimes they don't even know they can claim an exemption and they're not. And so that's what the department is trying to get around is reduce confusion, and this helps those manufacturers. Our sales tax application, when they apply for us, it says, what type of business are you in? And so the department does our absolute best to try and get them in the right category. But in one sentence, can you accurately classify a business every single time? And so that's a portion of it. There's also a little quirk in our statutes, again, good or bad, that's your decision, that not all manufacturers have to license with us. If you're selling wholesale for resale, it's one of the very few I can think of where you're actually selling tangible personal property. You don't have to license with us. But there is one, and I think in my memo, it says 3915-107J. I think that's 106. So if you're making notes there as well, but this qualifier makes it tough. And if you remove the qualifier, you're not changing what the department administers as the intent of this exemption. You're still getting an exemption for manufacturing machinery. And we have definitions of machinery and manufacturing in our statutes. So you can just substitute those words and still come out with the same outcome. Now, paragraph 2, the official language is does not include non-capitalized machinery except machinery and expensed in accordance with section 179 of the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, what did I just say? And so that's what our manufacturers tell us as well. We generally administer this as, hey, if you buy a piece of machinery and it has a lifespan of less than a year, then it doesn't qualify. Okay, that's generally how we administer it. But right now, manufacturers, they're, again, in general, they're a little iffy on this as well. And then it's tied to a federal government regulation that could change. And so that's the difficulty that we have, let alone the department doesn't always ask them, hey, what did you expense out when you filed your federal income tax returns? And so the department tries to stay away from that. And just by removing that qualifier, the department does not see any issues with removing those two qualifiers. And now your exemption says, hey, if you're purchasing machinery and you're going to be building something new, making something new, you get this exemption.
Members, any question? So this, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick question. You mentioned in there of equipment that have less than a year lifespan. How do you determine that 1 year? Thank
Yeah,
you.
maybe give us an example.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, great question. I don't have good examples for you. The reason I'm sitting here in front of you with this tax administration issue.
So as I hear you present this, so really, this is going to make it easier for business to qualify and remove these qualifiers, these barriers really that nobody really understands.
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Okay, that's, go ahead, Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I'm, you know, at first when I read this, I thought we were doing something to the exemption, and we're not. So thankfully that's not happening. But I think it does clarify it. And to Senator Ide's point about being 1 year, I think that's what the second paragraph there was, because section 179 equipment is anything that gets on a depreciation schedule. And so if there's a depreciation schedule, it's obviously longer than a year. But getting rid of it, I think, would just put the ball in the department's court to determine what equipment would be expensed out in 1 year. So maybe that can be done by rules and regulations, but doesn't need to be in the statute. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And that's number 12 then. Okay, good. On to the next then.
So next up, Mr. Chairman, bottom of page 9, this is a reporting requirement with the department as well as the Wyoming Business Council and the Department of Workforce Services to report on a number of these exemptions, and this would just repeal that reporting requirement. This was item 1 on the department list.
Okay, I'm a little nervous about this one because I think we always want to know what's happening with exemptions, but go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so this was number 1 on the department's list of tax administration issues. So right now,
You
this,
said it was not number 1? Or
it was number
was
1.
number one?
This was number 1. And the reason behind that is, so we have to do annual exemption. Yeah, so members of the committee, each year we have to do these annual exemption reports, and it's only on a couple of them. It's on the manufacturing exemption, data centers, and broadband internet providers providing broadband in underserved areas. So, and throughout the years, there have been some additions and subtractions to that. This just repeals that reporting requirement. Now, the department has engaged in conversations to see if there's just better ways. That's why. Our response, what we do is we survey these businesses and we say, hey, go through your books and take a look and see how much you purchased and utilized this exemption. And our response rates are not very good. I was checking when I was preparing today, and our highest response rate is 48%. So we just can't provide the legislature with good information on the true cost of these exemptions. And then we partner with the Business Council because, like we talked about before, a lot of digital stuff, they don't have to license with us. So we don't license broadband providers. In many cases, the department doesn't license data centers either because there's no imposition statute for data centers. And so then we partner with the Business Council, we partner with the State of Wyoming Information Administration and Information Department. And then we put this all together, and our A&I department runs some analysis on us on the data that we get, no projections, and says, hey, if this exemption goes away, here's the cost with jobs, wages, all of those items. The department and it's a legislative question as well. So is there a better way than the department surveying businesses without penalty? There's no penalty if you don't respond to us, and then giving the legislature incomplete information. This does nothing to the exemptions. It's just the department's reporting requirement that I'll be providing to you in November at the next meeting on the cost of these exemptions. So the thought here is that it's repealed temporarily, and then the legislature and other groups who could get involved with this, is there a better way so that we can provide the legislature with better information on the true cost of exemptions, if that's the will?
Thank you.
All right, next up, Mr. Chairman, bottom of page 10. Let's just remove the ability for an out-of-state vendor that's not subject to this article to voluntarily license with the department. And that was item 11 on the department topic list.
Okay, go ahead. Number 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one. So in fiscal year 2015, the Wyoming Department of Revenue had 16,000 active licenses, 16,000. Fast forward 9 years, so less than 10 years, we have 47,000 active licenses. So what this means is that in a span of less than a decade, we have 3 times the amount of licenses here in the state of Wyoming. And then the department has 1 less employee. Now, that's not part of the equation here, but what's happening is that with remote sellers, okay, marketplace facilitators, and then with the state of Wyoming's taxpayer-friendly LLC laws, we have companies, organizations, individuals from all over the world licensing here in the state of Wyoming. They're getting a sales tax resale license, a sales tax license, and then they're also getting business legitimacy so that they can conduct operations all over the United States and the world. So here, what this change does, it says, hey, you'll need to license with the department if you meet our economic nexus or have a physical location here in Wyoming. If you don't need a license from the state of Wyoming. You don't need to use Wyoming's laws to use them all throughout the country and the world. Now, the legislature's question here to the department should be, hey, why do you want to prevent people who want to voluntarily send you money? And that is a valid question. What we're finding, though, is that the vast majority of these folks are not. And I can run a fiscal note on people who would who license with us, but don't report any tax. I can certainly do that. I also can tell you the amount of administrative time it takes us to issue licenses. Okay, then we give them ample time to comply. Then we've got to revoke the license and we give them ample time because remember, here in the state of Wyoming, even the department is uber taxpayer friendly. We want to help them as much as we can. But these vendors that we're licensing right now are not compliant vendors for the most part. I'm not stereotyping, but for the most part. In my presentation in June, I think I told you that we have more out-of-state licenses than we do here in the state of Wyoming. And so this is one where my staff, when this bill popped out on the website, is something that would be, we could then move to helping our taxpayers that are more local and then working with us and submitting tax that go to fund all these essential services that we use every day.
So the question then, and these are the voluntary license. I mean, no effect on the mandatory, the folks who meet these thresholds. So we're not gonna lose any revenue that they should be remitting to the state. Correct?
Mr. Chairman, correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, this removes, so right now you have to license with us if you're in the state of Wyoming or you meet our economic thresholds, which is another portion of this
Yeah, I
bill.
saw that
So
one.
if you meet those, you've got a license with us. This says, hey, if you don't meet any of those, you're not going to come to Wyoming just to get business legitimacy, a sales tax license to purchase wholesale for resale.
Very good. So if those 47,000 license, just, you don't have to give us the exact, but just ballpark, how many of those you don't collect any money from that are in this voluntary thing, you think?
Mr. Chairman,
Went from 16,000.
to 47,000 in less than a decade. Yes. I'm gonna punt until I can get you the exact figure. It's a lot. And I know there's a percentage, but I just don't want to overstate it. I can get that to you as well.
Over half?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll punt over half for now. Okay, very good. Okay, so that takes us through 10 and 11. And that is item number 11. And I'm on page 11. Now we're on page 12. Is that right?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, page 12 over to 13. This is related to the collection of taxes for motor vehicles and trailers. And this would just specify at the end that the county treasurer shall collect and remit to the department the tax in effect in the county of the owner's principal residence as indicated on the owner's driver's license or other government issued identification. And that was item 16 in the department list.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So this is one, it's a consistency question. And so you've got snowbirds all throughout the state of Wyoming. You've got taxpayers who migrate across county lines as well. And so in conversations with county treasurers, which I talk with almost every single day, each one of them does it a little bit differently on where you have to license your vehicle or what documents they use to verify where you're located. And so I checked Game and Fish, election. I went through a variety of statutes trying to figure out a definition of personal residence. And we had some of that conversation yesterday on what qualifies you as a resident here in Wyoming, or how many months you have to be here to claim a certain exemption. So we don't have a definition of personal residence, but in our rules, we've got something that says a person's fixed, true, or permanent physical Wyoming address of which a person intends to return. Well, that doesn't really help with snowbirds or tax administration for motor vehicles. And do you want it with some sort of government issued ID or a driver's license, or you can go the other way as well. Do you want the counties to have that discretion? And maybe that's an option too. Right now, there's not as much consistency as there could be. And is it your intention to have consistency among where a person pays the sales tax on their motor vehicles?
So your change then is on page 13, line 11.
Mr. Chairman, correct.
That
Yes.
seems pretty simple, pretty common sense, wherever your driver's license is. There a problem with that?
Mr. Chairman, the conversation that I've had with some county treasurers is that sometimes there's a delay when you can get your driver's license. Now, I'm not saying that's legal or not. I'm not in law enforcement, but there can be delays on when you get a valid driver's license in your new county of residence. But the department and working with Mr. Anderson felt that this was a really good starting point, and then it could be up to the legislature to determine if they wanted or any other supporting documentation or your driver's license, and that's where the tax is paid.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, come back to your snowbird issue, if you've got someone that lives half the year here and half the year in Arizona, elects to get their driver's license in Arizona, how would that happen then?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas. Yeah, and the department does that sometimes as well, because each counties will do that just a little bit differently. Now, if you have documentation that says you have a personal residence here, the state of Wyoming is going to try, and our county treasurers are going to try and collect on that as well. But snowbirds is the reason for this tax administration issue, is because there are some questions there. And do you want to solidify that or not? So if they did get a driver's license in Arizona, the way this is written, the state of Wyoming would miss out on that tax. But it also goes the other way as well. If someone, because they taxpayer friendly Wyoming, get a driver's license in Wyoming, then maybe we're getting taxed that we didn't before.
More questions. Now we're moving on to the next, beyond on the page, bottom of 13, 14, item number 6.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So bottom of page 13 over to page 14, this is related to vendor compensation for the collection of the tax. So you can see there currently it's kind of a two-tiered calculation. This would just take it to one rate. It would be 1.95% of the amount of the tax due. You'll see there on line 11, there's still the maximum amount of $500 in any month. And this was item 6 on the department topic list.
Go ahead, Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This comes from the vendors in every single one of your areas. This calculation, especially for our mom and pops and our hard copy filers, is a little difficult. So the way it works is, so if you submit tax, the first $6,250 in tax, so $6,000, I'm going to use round figures, you get off 1.95%. Then the remaining amount up to $500, you get 1% off, but you cannot get more than $500 per month per ownership. Okay, so what this does is clarify that calculation. It just says, hey, you get 1.95% off your sales tax that you collected from customers up to $500. Right now, and I believe just in our annual report that was published last week, our vendor comp in Wyoming gave back vendors in Wyoming $33 million. And so that's a material figure. Now the department doesn't anticipate any material change in a fiscal note either way here. So this just says, if you're a small mom and pop and say you submitted under the threshold of the $6,000, maybe you get a little bump up in this, but everyone gets 1.95% up to the $500. It's to clarify it for our vendors.
Make it simple.
Make it simple. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Any questions? Okay. So the next one would be page bottom of 14, 15 over to 16, and it's number 8. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So on 15, this is related to the processing of refunds. Current language says all refund requests received by the department shall be approved or denied within 90 days. This would just provide for a tolling of that time period if the department refers that request to the Department of Audit for additional information. And as you noted, that was item 8, and turn it over to Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one that's always given the Department of Revenue and the Department of Audit pause. So say we get a valid refund request from a vendor and it's complicated, or it involves a little bit more than the Department of Revenue can tackle, or it for whatever reason, it needs to be referred to the Department of Audit. So for those of you who don't know, our Department of Audit and our Department of Revenue are actually separate agencies here in Wyoming. We're very unique in that regard, but we've got a really good partnership. And I spent years at the Department of Audit. What this does is it says, hey, if the Department of Revenue needs some help, and we're going to refer it to the Department of Audit for a full audit, there's a tolling of that 90-day period. Because we don't know, we can't verify that refund, and we need some help, or we need assistance, or we need a partnership. And so that's what this does. It doesn't deny any sort of refunds or anything along those lines. It just says, hey, if you send it to the Department of Audit, you've met this requirement, and then they're going to verify that refund on their behalf.
On to the next, that is, so we're over now on page 16. And this is item number 2, 16 on to 17, is that correct? Item number 2.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So this is the department's required to collect information on sales of propane, butane, liquefied gas, and compressed natural gas. This just authorizes the department to impose a penalty of $100 for a vendor who fails to provide that information. And then it also allows the department to waive that penalty if the vendor ultimately provides that information.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This one's a little bit different than the exemption survey reports that I give to you every single year. What this one is if you sell propane, butane, LNG, or CNG, we send you a survey every single year. And we say, hey, how much of this did you sell? And the survey is pretty straightforward. And we actually have much better response rates with this one. This one ranges between 70 and 80%. The difference with this one is what those vendors put on the surveys is put into a calculation, and we transfer money to the state highway fund. That's the difference with this one. There's money involved. Last year, we transferred about $501,000 from the state general fund to the state highway fund. And that was based on these exemption surveys. Our response rates are better, but they're not perfect. And so every single person or vendor who doesn't respond to us means less highway dollars. Now, the distinction here is we're not, the $100 penalty, that was a starting point. Okay, that would be the legislature's decision, and maybe that's not the way they want to go to penalize. But I don't think the committee or maybe the legislature know that, hey, this is one we don't have to report to you on each year. And did you know this is happening? And did you know that there are highway dollars that are being transferred based on these surveys? So should there be a penalty, or should they not qualify for an exemption, or whatever that is? Just letting you know our response rates are better, but they're not perfect. And it's tied to highway dollars.
Yep.
Senator Pappas.
So if we do put this in here, where do those penalty dollars flow?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, our penalties at the Department of Revenue go to the school fund. They go to the schools.
Okay, anybody else? Well, I don't anticipate you're gonna have much. I mean, how many vendors are missing? How many vendors total in that survey?
Mr. Chairman, great question. This one has a couple hundred.
So you're missing about 40 40 vendors. And
Yes,
you're just trying to say, hey, take 5 minutes, fill this out.
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. 17 to 18, number 7.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is related to taxes collected in a resort district. And the current language says that the vendor has to be, it's for sales within the district. Current language says by vendors physically situated within that district. This would strike that language. And this is item 7 on the department list.
Go ahead, Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you once again. So this one is interesting to me as well. So right now, that language says you have to be physically located in the district to charge and pay this tax. That's not what's happening right now, right? And so this doesn't change anything that's not happening right now. Right now, you have large online retailers that are charging your resort district tax, and they shouldn't be, right? The onus is on the vendors actually located in the district to self-accrue and charge themselves tax. And as we know with use tax, that doesn't always happen. Businesses are much better at it than us individually. But what this does is it removes the physically situated in the resort district. So it says, hey, if you ship anything or you sell anything in the resort district, it's subject to that resort district tax. This right here is how it's currently working. The language that Mr. Anderson put in, this is how it's currently working, but that's not how it is in statute. So this one, it may be the legislature's intent that if you want everything in that resort district to have the tax on it, this language would do that. If you don't, if you only want it still to have physically, then the department's going to have to work with some vendors to remove that tax and have them quit sending it into us.
World keeps changing. Yeah, how we buy and sell things. Okay, any comments on this, members? Questions? Okay. Very good. On to the next then. Remote sellers.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So this is one we briefly touched on earlier, but sales from remote sellers, currently there's one of 2 ways you can be required to license as a remote seller. You can have gross revenue of $100,000 or more, or have 200 or more separate transactions. And this would strike that second qualification of the number of transactions. This was item 14 on the list.
Any questions, members, on that? So you just keep the money threshold.
Mr. Chairman, correct. Yes. And this is supported by the streamlined sales tax agreement, which we are a member of, and the state of South Dakota, who is famous for the Wayfair versus South Dakota,
Right.
has gone to this as well.
Right, very good. Okay, members, okay.
All right, next up, Mr. Chairman, again, this is in the use tax, and this is just a conforming change to one we already discussed earlier on specified digital products. Again, here's just striking the language that it's only if the purchaser has permanent use. And that was again, item 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've gone over this today. It's just that conforming language. So if it is the legislature's intent that you want something that is downloaded digitally temporarily to be taxable, this would help that as well.
Any questions? Okay. Anything else for us? Okay, we're gonna open this up to public comment. We might just go ahead and take this bill up, knock it out. I just want to thank you 2 gentlemen, really put in hours and hours and hours of work to clean all this up and bring it together. So appreciate your work. Great presentation. Okay, are there members here? Anyone in the public would like to testify on this bill or any of these issues? Sales tax. Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
are there anybody online?
we do have Bob Jensen.
Okay,
online.
very good. Mr. Jensen?
Thank you, Mr.
Well-
Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Bob Jensen. I'm Government Affairs Representative with Holland and Hart. We have two comments today. One on behalf of Jackson Hole Mountain Resort. The issue with them would be the removal of this, or the imposition of a sales tax on the sale of lift tickets, basically. And the issue with that is competition. Jackson Hole, as you know, is a world-class resort, but it also competes mightily with similar resorts in Utah and Colorado. And the 6% change or addition or cost for them would be detrimental to their business and would be not competitive with the other resorts. So we've had this conversation before with the idea of putting taxes on the service of lift tickets. And so that's our comment for that. And if you're okay, Mr. Chairman, I have some more comments for a different client. That's all right.
Yeah, sure. You bet.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Thank you. The manufacturing sales tax exemption. I represent the Alliance of Wyoming Manufacturers and the Wyoming Innovative Entrepreneurs. And the need for the sales tax exemption is clear. We've been able to remain competitive with other states that have this. About 40 other states have some form of sales tax exemption for the purchase of capital equipment used in manufacturing. We're in support of the repeal of the reporting mechanism on a temporary basis. We have been in conversations with the department to try and find a way to get more accurate data on the use of this exemption, and also the ability to compare the usage and the purchase of this equipment and the property taxes associated with that to the sales tax exemption. So we're in support of a temporary repeal on that, just so we can get together with them, work on a much more accurate use of information to allow people to know what is the benefit of this exemption for the manufacturing sector in Wyoming. That's my testimony, Mr. Chairman. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Any questions for Mr. Jensen? So on the manufacturing, removing those, just how is proposed, do you support that? Removing those two qualifiers, the NAICS code and the other? Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We would support that.
very good. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Jensen, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else here? Anybody else online? Members, I think, we've done all this work. I think we're just gonna charge ahead and work this bill.
Mr. Chairman.
We all right with it? You're good with that? So we're gonna close public comment and,
Move the bill.
members, what's your pleasure? Move the bill by Senator Pappas. There's second? Second by the co-chair. Okay. Members, let's start just working through this and you can offer your amendments. Appreciate again the work that's put into this thing to help clean all this up. Okay, so flipping over to page 2. Any issues on page 2? Really goes over to through item 10. Okay, how about page 3? I think this is item 18 in your list. Okay, and then flipping over to page 4. Page 4 is item 3. I believe it's item 3. Okay. On this. Repair of tangible personal property. Okay, very good. And then how about on page 5? Kind of clarifying on the taxation on the production. Clarifying that labor before is not taxed.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Swanson.
if I could make a motion to delete this section, I just think it's where I think this bill is going. I just think it's too complicated. And I don't quite understand it enough. And from talking to some other people in my district and in this field of work, they're not sure they fully understand it. So I guess my motion would be to delete K, or the amendments in K that deal with the oil field.
Okay, so that would be lines 21 through 30, and then over to page 5, 1 through 7. Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Representative Northrop and Oakley. Okay, any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no.
No.
Okay, that motion has been adopted. Okay. Now we're on line 20 on page 5, streaming, flipping over to page 6. The same issue goes over to the basically line 7 of page 6, number 5 on the department's topics list. Any motions there of moving on now? Keep moving to page 6, exemptions through, this is the transportation business, through line 11 on page 7, item 4. Okay, very good. Now we're moving on to bottom of 7 over through line 7 on page 8, item 13. Okay, about these user fees, making it clear that they're not going to be charged. Okay. Now moving on to basically bottom of 8 over to page 9 through line 10. We just heard on the manufacturing, these qualifiers. No amendments on that. Okay, and then reporting on bottom of page 9, 23 through line 7, reporting piece on that. Okay, and then the next is the voluntary vendors. Starts on line 25 of page 10, goes over really the changes through the top of page 11, and then the rest of that statute is all page 11 over to page 12. And that is topic 11 on the memo. And that's those voluntary vendors. Okay, very good. And then moving over to page 12. Page 12, starting on line 17, which takes over establishing these residents with the driver's license through line 12 on page 13. That's item number 16 in the memo. Any amendments there? Okay, now moving on to the bottom of 13, line 25, flipping over to line 15 on page 14. This is item number 6 on this payment to vendors on the 1.9%. Any comments or amendments there? Okay, seeing none. Bottom of 14, line 28, taxpayer remedies at 39-15-109, over through the bottom of 15 and the top of 16. It's item number 8. And you can see the changes, this 90-day when this work goes on between the Department of Audit and the Department of Revenue. Any amendments there? Okay, seeing none, we're now on page 16, 39-15-111. It's distribution. This is the fuel tax from propane and other LNG or compressed gas products going to YDOT. About imposition of a possible fine for not doing the survey. That takes us over to the top of 17. Okay, an amendment would be Senator Ide. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that page 16, lines 24 through 26, guess it goes to the next page to lines 1 through 4. I'd like to make an amendment to that to give these vendors, instead of a penalty, an incentive to get that survey in, and either, you know, a $100 less tax to them if they do get that survey in, or just lower their licensing fee. How we word that, I'm not sure, but I'd like to change that, instead of a penalty, to be an incentive to get that survey in. Thank you.
Okay, is there gonna need a little clearer, but can somebody want to second that? Does anybody want to second that and clarify that a little bit? Okay, Representative Bear. Okay, let's discuss that then. Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Pretty much just reiterate what I just said there. I don't want to cause any more pain to the vendors and make it harder for them to do business on a survey that they may or may not want to fill out and get penalized for it. I think if we incentivize them with a lower, you know, a lower tax or a lower licensing fee, it might encourage them to do that instead of just getting fined for it.
Okay, Representative Oakley has a hand up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, in response to that, I think that the last sentences there, the top of page 17 addresses that, saying that the department, which, you know, on a showing of good cause, can waive the penalty, provided they provide the information. So I think that's the remedy right there, which is okay, then get it done, and the department can waive that, but it's an incentive then to get it done. So I feel like that's addressed.
Okay. Anyone else? Any Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The old adage, you get more with honey than you do with a stick, I think applies here. And I can give you an example where the department's already doing this, and it could be used as a guide in how this should be crafted. But on sales and use tax, if you pay by a certain date after the close of the period, at the end of the year, you get a discount on your sales tax. So I think a similar methodology could be used. I don't have a suggestion for the amount. We could put a placeholder in there. Maybe it's $100, but something that creates it as an incentive. I do not believe that having your penalty waived is a carrot. I just don't. I think that's still a stick. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I really think that, you know, if you put an incentive, then you're gonna pay everybody that does the survey. So you're basically paying for the survey. And if that's your intent, then vote for it. But I believe that you know, most people will do a survey when they know that there's a penalty involved if I don't do it. I mean, federal government does that to us all the time, right? But with the language that we just talked about, where it could be waived, you know, if you provide the information, we won't give you the penalty. I really don't see a big problem with that. So I like it as it is written. I don't think that that incentivizing everybody to do it really is the way to go.
Okay, any further discussion? So just clarify the amendment, then I kind of heard a couple ideas, but you want to hone in on that so we can vote on it. Go ahead. Who's going to speak for it? The first or the second? Okay, go ahead.
I'll suggest that it's rather than $100 fine for those 40 or so that fail to do so, that it's a $50 bonus, if you will, or a refund at the end of the year if they have submitted that report.
Okay, so that's the motion. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, I'll, discussion Representative Wannister.
So that was a, is that a friendly amendment?
Oh, I think that I asked for clarification on the amendment because it kind of came out in two forms. Said as an incentive or a payment. It never was clear at the beginning. I didn't hear a number, so I just wanted to get it clarified so we can vote on it. It's
No.
50.
Right, so specify what we're voting on, and then I might have a question.
Okay, so here's how I understand it. Representative Swanser, is that when you fill out this survey, the 400 people that this survey is sent to, when they fill it out, they'll get a $50 credit at the end of the year on their taxes.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd just say now the department has to credit everybody, and maybe that's easy on their bills. Maybe they have to send them a certified check. I'm not sure. But I think we were trying to make administration easier, and this seems like an added burden to be crediting accounts now.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, say no.
No.
I think that motion has failed. Being called, all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Wonder what this vote's gonna be. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that motion's not been adopted. I would move that we just take this out. Just take this part out.
You got a second, Linda?
Okay, and I think we just keep working on this, and we're talking about 80 vendors roughly. And I think we just keep working on it. And so the motion is to take this out. Any discussion, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that stays, that is repealed out of this bill. Okay, the next item, we're on 3915-204, this taxation rate. And that goes over to line 5 and 18. And this is number 7 on your topics list, right? Number 7. And this resort district tax. Okay, any discussion? Representative Wanitzer.
And maybe I should have asked earlier, but I think we only have 3 resort districts in the state, and apparently we only have 2 now. And I just want to make sure they are aware this change is coming, and it does sound like maybe they are getting revenues they perhaps shouldn't be, but I'm not sure what the amounts are, and maybe just a nod from the department that they've been notified this is coming. Okay. I'm getting the nod.
Actually, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So
I'm wondering if they're not getting revenue they should be getting. That's how I see this too, but yeah. Any other discussion on this? Representative Store.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand this, that this is what Mr. Jensen referred to and concern over that were we to pass this, that lift tickets would have this modest tax imposed. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I think,
Okay.
yeah. I'm looking at Mr. Fanning here. He's gonna come up and clarify that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No, user fees would still not be taxable, including the ski lift tickets.
All right, thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Now, I think we're moving on to remote sellers. And that is on bottom of 18 over through 19. This is item number 14. To stay with that 100,000 threshold and remove that, the number of transactions. Okay. Sensing none there, I'm moving on to it's on this imposition. This is use tax, which we've already kind of dealt with on a previous one on the sales tax, 19 on to 20 on the digital. It's topic number 5. That's the last item in this bill. Okay, any amendments? Okay, members, this bill is amended, taking out 2 items, I believe. And so with that, again, appreciate your work on this. Any other amendments? Okay, I'm gonna call for the roll. Please call the roll on working draft 226. I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
Sorry. This is for us to vote on the draft to take forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I have some discussion before we go?
Oh,
I'm
sure. If
sorry.
you'd like to discuss, if you want to talk, go ahead.
Yeah. We need more of that. I don't know. I guess my thought, and I can go either way, but my thought would be to vote no on this and to take it to our next meeting. I'm even now kind of getting some comments from people being like, there's a lot to this bill and that maybe they would like to comment a little further. Maybe we have a little more work to do. So I think there's a lot of content to this, and I think maybe we need to take it up, push it back and take it up again at our next meeting. And I don't know what everybody thinks about that, but I wanted to at least put it out there for discussion.
Any other discussion, Senator Pappas?
Mr. Chairman, we had public comment and there's no public comment on this bill, but one person online. I don't know that anybody has any big issues with most of these, and the 2 that we did, we took them out of the bill. So I really don't think we need to put this off again.
Well, and if the bill,
Everybody's had plenty of time to look at this bill. It's been out there. If they had some heartburn, that's why we have these meetings, for them to come and speak to us, and no one has come to speak to us. So I think we're good to go.
okay, and I think it won't be the last opportunity if we do pass this bill and actually, should I say, choose to sponsor it. And if it does move forward, and if it does actually make a 2/3 vote to get introduced, and it actually does make it out of a committee, people have a lot of public comment on it. But I'm trying to, that 1 day thing at the end, trying to keep that day from growing on us. So Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm a bit with the representative down there. I know there's some hot topics here, but in light of the fact that we have another shot at this, I guess you might say, I'll stand down a bit, but I know there's a couple of items in here I really need to understand much better. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, very good. And again, appreciate staff and department working on a lot of these things are cleanups. Obviously, there might be a few more you want to talk about, but we certainly took 2 of those out that so appreciate your work, committee. Okay, with that, let's please call the roll on this working draft 226.
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Block,
Aye.
Representative Northrup, Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Strack.
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer, Co-Chairman Beitman,
Aye.
Chairman Harshman.
Aye,
14-9, Mr. Chairman.
holy smokes. Okay,
Stinky bill.
very good. Well, now next on our agenda, and I'm just looking. Does everybody need just a short little break? I think so. It's 3:14. Let's take a 10-minute break. 3:25. We'll be right back at it. 3:25. Okay, I think we have a quorum. We're gonna get back at it here. The next item is number 19 on the agenda. No, I take that back. Just did 19. We were on item number 20, the State Board of Equalization. And you didn't bring the chair with you today. I'm just getting organized here. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay. Okay. All right, Mr. Hartscott, go ahead. I think, welcome to the committee. I think we're all ready for you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and honorable members of the interim committee. It's my pleasure to be back here today. I'll tell you, I always like to introduce myself only because I just hit 25 years with the state, and I started testifying in front of committees like this back in 99. I think my second year. I worked at the Attorney General's office for 17 years. And I eventually moved up into the Civil Division Deputy position, where Civil Division, if you're not familiar with the 5 divisions, is primarily responsible for reviewing all of the legislative bills and advising the governor as well as legislators on specific issues. So I'm very familiar with the committee process and testifying, and I always enjoyed coming back before the committees. With that, I want to, just by way of review, this bill was pretty much close to the finish line last year, and something happened. Somehow the idea that this bill had some problems with it kind of sank it, and it was in the second house, and I didn't actually hear the discussion on the floor, but for whatever reason, the bill died. And so I want to cover what I think were some of the misunderstandings. And I want to try to assuage you of any kind of suspicion that what is happening here is different than any court. We actually don't have the authority that a court basically has to resolve disputes. And
just to remind the committee and folks who are here that this bill passed the Senate and it ran into trouble on the floor of the House. And was it third reading or was it in committee of the whole even? It was committee of the whole. Okay. So,
but strangely enough, I don't think there was any no vote in the committees. I mean, it flew and it really kind of confused me as to what happened. So I brought some additional materials and I provided those for you. I know that some folks said that there was a concern that what we could do is basically hijack the local county board process and force them to address issues that they didn't want to. Just not the case. But let me just try to break it down into the most simple terms. And I'm going to start with an analogy. Let's assume that like a committee like this, you have special interests come before you with concerns about a law, and you have a concerned constituent coming for you. And that constituent says, we would like you to take this law and add this provision, which often happens. You have groups coming before you and they want you to change the law. And they tell you that fixing the statute in a certain way with certain language will address their concern. And some of you look at that language and you then read the rest of the statute. And let's just take assume that the statute's fairly large, pretty involved. And some of you look at other provisions of the statute and you notice that by incorporating the additional language that's requested, that other language in the statute is going to be thrown into doubt, maybe difficult to reconcile, all within the same statutory framework. So you go back into a committee hearing like this and you turn to the agency and you say, agency, what do you think of this new language? And the agency says, well, we haven't really had enough time to work it out, and so we can't really give you an answer one way or the other, which happens. And then you turn back to the constituent and you say, now, understand we're struggling with your additional language that you would like because there's another provision in that statute which won't quite work the way we think it should. We think there's a problem.
if we provide this additional language. And the party then says, whoa, 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 we don't want you to consider that. We want you to just look at what we have brought to you because it'll fix our situation. And you look at them and you say, well, our mandate is to make sure that the law is clear and it operates in a way that the public in general can understand it and that everybody can understand what we intend. And by your language, the rest of the statute might struggle in terms of how it works. And then they come back to you and they say, well, that's okay. We still think you should just focus on our language. That's in effect what we had happen in Solvay. We had the Department of Revenue, and it was a mineral tax case. It was Trona or soda ash. And we had Solvay, and they were before us in a dispute about the deduction for bagging of soda ash. Soda ash is something that's produced that goes into detergents and such. It's fairly plentiful in Wyoming. We have several Trona and soda ash mines. And the legislation concerning the valuation of soda ash is fairly involved, and there were quite a few hearings years ago. There's a lot to it. And when we got the dispute in front of us in a hearing, and after the hearing, we looked at that, and I'm very familiar with the statute and the valuation statutes. It's what I've done for 25 years. And we all looked at that and we said, look, they're fighting as though, or they're coming to us as though they're entitled to a deduction. And the question before us is how to calculate that deduction. Okay. But when you look at the statute as a whole, it's quite clear to us that they don't get any additional deduction at all. There's an industry factor, and the industry factor ties in a definition of processing, and it's a fairly involved statute. And so what we did is we went back to the parties. We didn't, force anything on them, but we said, look, we have a concern here, and we would like you to come in and brief this question for us because we see a problem with how you have brought this case to us. And we need to be able to interpret the statute so that they are applied consistent with the legislative intent, and that the answer is in accordance with law. And when they came to us, we had them brief it. We had them re-argue it. It was a legal question. There were no facts in dispute. It wasn't as though we, went off the rails and conducted an entirely different proceeding. But we needed to make sure that we had the law in its entirety before us and that we could reconcile all of it. And we ruled that the Solvay entity was not entitled to a deduction at all. It's all included within the industry factor. The industry factor, as defined by the legislature, included all these deductions. And Solvay and the department were thinking, well, they get an additional deduction on top of the factor. So Solvay went and complained that we had violated our jurisdiction. And in a 3-2 decision, the court agreed. And they somehow distinguished our authority and said that we can raise issues when we're wearing our regulatory hat, our equalization side function, which doesn't make sense. We don't adjudicate anything on the equalization side. We just go in and deal with the assessors directly and figure out whether they're applying the valuation statutes correctly. It's on the statutory side where we sit as a court, and every court under the sun has to have the ability to take the law and make sure that all of the law is looked at, not just the interpretations of the parties. So since the Solvay decision came down and there was a two-judge dissent and they nailed it, they specifically identified how the majority got it wrong. But since that decision, we've had about 5 different cases where we've had to answer the question presented incorrectly because the parties that came before us did not correctly interpret the statutes or did not consider all of the statutes. I provided you 2 of the footnotes, and I apologize for the bright yellow streak on the one. It's our printer. But if you look at the bottom of the pages, and they're just random decisions. In fact, one of the decisions concerns the transportation deduction or exemption that Mr. Fanning was talking about. If you look at those two footnotes, like, and I'll just, if you refer to the one that says Merit Energy Company, that's typical of the footnotes that we've had to drop about 5 times now. And what we indicate is we aren't convinced that Merit is engaged in a transportation business, even though the electricity at issue is used to move production fluids through the gathering system. Merit is a production company. They don't transport anything other than, within their production process. If you look at the very bottom of that footnote, we state, but because the department has conceded this point. See, the department didn't interpret it correctly by our understanding of the law. And of course, Merit didn't interpret it the way we would have. But we had to say, look, you both have come to us with an incorrect interpretation of this. But because Solvay tells us we can't get it right, we basically have to tell you which of your wrong answers is least wrong. And that's absurd, but that's what's happened in about 6 cases. If that doesn't strike you as completely ridiculous, then I haven't done my job. But in fact, we've had 4 or 5 cases where both parties have gotten it wrong. And we've had an opportunity to show them, look, here's the way you need to look at these statutes, because that's our job by statute, is to interpret and identify the intent of this group and the legislature as a whole. But because of Solvay, it's very problematic, and we're basically calling, we're forced to rule that one is correct, even if they're both wrong. I think I also have a fix for you. I think we can take the language that we had last year, and there's a part that I would remove it, and I think it simplifies it, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Bill draft.
Yeah, the 3rd page, if you just go to the 3rd page of, I think it's Senate File 39.
So it's the bill before us, it's Senate File 39. It was a joint bill in the last session, so.
If you just go to the line 9.
On page 3.
On page 3, and you strike from May through and of of line 10. So you take out that phrase, may address issues not raised by the parties. And I believe that it captures the clear point that we don't have to accept an interpretation of the parties. If they both get it wrong, in other words, we can say, look, you have to look at the law differently, both of you. We have to get this right. And so basically it would say the authority of the board to decide all questions, which is already in the statutes. That's what we've got. But the Supreme Court kind of bifurcated that authority and said, you have it in one instance, but not in your adjudicatory function instance. If you start with the authority of the board to decide all questions under this paragraph, which is farther up, shall apply to questions related to the board's adjudicative and regulatory functions. Period. When deciding questions under this paragraph, the board, and then jump right to, is not limited to the legal interpretations presented by the parties. That, I think, should remove any hint that what we can do is force parties to go in a different direction, or to require that parties argue things they don't want to. But we have to be able to force parties to look at the law in its entirety, which we can't now. One last point, and all of this is also included in my 2 white papers, but I provided a kind of a watered down PowerPoint sheet that I use for, we do a lot of training with new assessors, as well as the state bar, because not very many folks, quite honestly, understand Wyoming's tax system. But if you look at this green page, it gives you a breakdown of our 2 roles, whether we're sitting in an appeal that concerns the state assessed tax, which is where the department's involved, and a local or a local tax, which is where there is an assessor. Just in a nutshell, none of these issues have ever arose with the local. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh my gosh, they can basically strong arm the local boards and they can force the local boards to do what they don't want to do. Not true. Never has happened. Never really can happen, because When we review a decision from a local board, we sit as a record review panel. That means we take the record and the decision as is. We don't have another hearing and have them relitigate it in front of us. We decide whether the county board got it right. Now, if the county board got it wrong, we do have the ability to say, we reverse, you didn't consider this law, or here's how you got it wrong, and we remand it to them, and then they have to go from there. But we don't, for lack of a better term, we don't hijack the county board process. The one time that we do have local appeals in front of us in the first instance, and you might remember this from a few years ago, we can have certified appeals. So if we have a county board that's conflicted, or if it's an incredibly difficult issue that really is going to present problems for the local board, they can ask to have it certified to us, and we have to accept that. But that's only happened once in the last 8 years. It's very seldom. We have only, so I mean, the instance where we would have a local appeal as a trial before us is maybe 1 out of 10 years, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years. I can't think of anything else that I can say to kind of get my point across. I just want you to understand, it's just as simple as that. Don't let anybody suggest that there's something mysterious or unorthodox here. There really isn't. If every district court in the state, even the OAH, the Office of Administrative Hearings, those are hearing officers that hear workers' comp cases, licensing cases, they have to apply the entire law as they get it. And if the parties come before a hearing officer and they've missed something in the statute, that hearing officer can't proceed and just answer the two arguments. He or she has to say to those parties, look, the law is this, and you haven't considered this component or this rule or this ruling. And we have to have all of that in the record, and all of that has to figure into my analysis and the answer to your dispute. So I hope that I've cut through some of the mystery or trepidation about what the board is trying to do. And here's another point. Until Solvay, this is what we did anyway. The Board of Equalization raises issues all the time with the parties. Quite honestly, litigants come before you and they don't always catch everything. That's never been a problem until Solvay happened, and the court just without mincing words, I think got it wrong. Or at least the majority did. I thank you, and I'll certainly help you with any questions that you may have.
Appreciate you not mincing any words. That's good. And I'm gonna appreciate your presentation, and Vice Chair Hartsguy. Representative Oakley has her hand up now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. What is your last name?
It's Hartsog, so the C is kind of strange. Just don't pronounce it, and it comes at the end before the G, so it's Hartsog.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hartzog. So I don't think it's as clear as you present. So maybe I'm one of those that I don't know if you'd call it mystery, but that I don't necessarily agree with some of the conclusions that you make. And so I'd like to discuss it and ask you some questions, certainly. But and including, of course, the Supreme Court saying that that's the case. So looking at the letter that the State Board of Equalization letter that you gave, I know we got it before the session. Just for example, the second to last paragraph, it says the change to statutory language makes clear that the board may fully examine the law when rendering a tax decision, even aspects of the law that the parties, and then of course with the mistakenly, at least according to you, fail to consider. And then say that all the other courts can do that. But that, I mean, it is commonplace. It is in, I don't know how many Supreme Court decisions that says that issue was not raised. You cannot raise this issue for the first time here. And there's something really important about that concept. And I think we're messing with that concept here. Because the idea being that you've got your lawyers on both sides and the court or the judge or the board. And you put the issues in front so that the parties know what they're arguing, what the law is, And then you've got the neutral board or the court, and they know what the argument is. And you can't go outside of that and argue, because it could be, I mean, that could make a mess, because then the parties aren't even prepared for what's in front of them. And this is done all the time in courts and in boards, and there is something different here. And so my question is, are you saying that you want an exception from that for the Board of Equalization? And so that's one question. I mean, and so looking at this issue, I mean, they were represented by Holland and Hart and somebody else, right? I mean, they were very, very well represented. And there's a very important fairness issue to making sure that everybody that goes in to litigate an issue knows what is in front of them, and that the court can't just start going over, or the board in this case, making a decision on other facts or other pieces of law. If that's going to happen, then there has to be time given, and then the parties come back and are able to present the law and the facts with preparation. And so I just think to say that this isn't something that happens is just incorrect. The fact is that the issues that are in front of the court have to be defined in every court case that I'm aware of. And so I just want to figure out how, I mean, I want to get there for you. And so I just would like you to address that. And then, so you just said to take out may address issues not raised by the parties, which would be huge, because that is certainly where I have the issue. But if we do that, then I don't know where we're getting, because saying it's not limited to the legal interpretations presented by the parties, a court's never limited by the legal interpretation given by the attorneys. They can make the right decision that they want on the law. They just can't be adding extra issues or extra facts in there that aren't in the court record. So with all that, I would like you to, I guess, address, I mean, I think you understand where I'm getting. So address both the, taking out that wording, as well as what your opinion is on this idea that this would be the only one that I think they can litigate, that the court or the board could be taking on an issue that the parties haven't even raised. So if you'd address that.
Very good. Mr. Hodgson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Oakley. You've latched on to language in an appellate decision, the Wyoming Supreme Court. You do often see that language, and where you have made an incorrect leap is this: when the court says you may not raise issues for the first time on appeal. That's in fact what a party is trying to do, but there was always a trial. And so what happens is, whether it's in front of the Board of Equalization as the trial court, whether it's in front of a district court, all of the issues are locked in, and the record is locked in, and everything, the arguments, nothing is brought to the Wyoming Supreme Court outside of that record, which is kind of what I was referring to when I talked about the county board thing. We sit as the Supreme Court in effect, because we sit as an appellate court. If the parties then, and they do all the time, they try to bring new arguments to us on appeal in a brief, in an argument, and we go, whoa, back it up. We don't get to consider that. You didn't give that opportunity to the county board to hear that evidence, that argument, and so forth. So the Wyoming Supreme Court says that all the time. What happens is there's a trial in the district courts, which is our state trial court. The party that loses then appeals up to the Wyoming Supreme Court, and maybe they don't have an attorney at first. Maybe they do. Maybe they get better counsel. Maybe their attorneys just double down and think, well, we can win it if we argue this. And they bring up new stuff to the Wyoming Supreme Court. And that right there is what you're reading when you see that. You may not raise new issues on appeal. So different instance altogether. What I'm talking about here is when we're the trial court. That's why this blue sheet is so important. When a state assessed, that means the Department of Revenue is a party. We are hearing the dispute for the first time. There's nothing below us. We are the first shot for the parties to come before us and get it right or wrong. They present the facts. We decide who we believe. We then apply the law and we issue a ruling. And then they can appeal up to the district court and then to the Wyoming Supreme Court. And guess what? If they don't bring those issues to us in the beginning, and they try to then call it sandbag, but if they try to add new issues and arguments and facts that they didn't present to us, that's when the district court would say, can't do that. You didn't give the Board of Equalization a chance to hear that evidence. We're not going to let you, in effect, sandbag the other party at the appellate court level. So please try to keep that straight. That's a tough one, because you're right. You might see that in 50% of the cases. You're going to see that line from the Wyoming Supreme Court. We are the trial court when we deal on state assessed. That means sales and use tax, any kind of mineral tax, and state assessed property. Those are pipelines, rail systems, that kind of thing. Okay. Your no surprise concept. What we did, because we're the trial court, we looked at the law and we said, look, we have to get this right. You have not construed the statutes correctly in your little dispute. And understand, before they get to us, the Department of Revenue and the taxpayer might have been battling for months, back and forth, letters, meetings, depositions, you name it. They may have fleshed out every single nuance of a dispute. Maybe not, but they may have. And so they then think they know what the facts are. They may think they understand what the law requires. You know, both parties in this instance, Solvay had good counsel. You're right. The Attorney General's office for the Department of Revenue, Holland and Hart for Solvay. But they both came to us with an incorrect interpretation. And in fact, it went against an earlier ruling from the board. The board had looked at the industry factor issue in the past, which was another kind of galling fact here. It's not like the parties didn't have this in the law. It was out there in a decision about 5 years earlier. They just didn't look at it. And what we did is simply say, look, your dispute is whether you are correctly calculating this deduction. All right, that's what you guys are fighting about. But the industry factor doesn't allow you an additional deduction. So you've interpreted the statute completely inconsistently with what the statute clearly says. Here's the other point that I want you to take. The very next year, the same case came, the same Solvay case, because what happened was the Department of Revenue, every year when it's dealing with minerals, it's not just 1 year. Every year it comes back around. Every year stands alone. Every year there's a deduction. Every year there's an assessment. The Department of Revenue agreed with us, brought the same case back the next year. Solvay again appealed. When we answered it consistent with what we would have answered it before, went all the way up to the Wyoming Supreme Court. The Wyoming Supreme Court agreed with us. So in effect, the year before, when we were told we couldn't raise the issue, they got a deduction they weren't entitled to. And that's an illustration of why it's so important that as a trial court, the board has the ability to require a complete review of the law, not just what the parties bring to us. Because what happens is if we have to pick the best of the two wrong answers, we now have a precedent out there that locks in the wrong answer. And parties are then misled as to what the law is. I can't tell you how many times the Department of Revenue has said, we're not going to go to the legislature and change the law until the board says we have to. They will oftentimes wait for the Board of Equalization and or then the Wyoming Supreme Court to tell them they're doing it wrong. But in this instance with Solvay, we had to tell them one of the wrong answers was correct, only to find out that the next year we were proven 100% correct. The language, extracted language that I suggested, the reason I think that this works, Representative Oakley, is the interpretation itself includes the issue. If we don't have to accept one of the interpretations, the interpretation itself infused within it is always going to be, what is the issue? Is there an issue that you've forgotten? If you bring to us an argument that the law says A, that's an interpretation of the law. We can always say, yeah, but your interpretation leaves out, section XY, Romanet numeral 2, which weighs into this analysis. So I think that having that language in there may address issues not raised is overkill. In other words, the legal interpretations presented by the parties would encapsulate all of the statutes, the rules, the precedent. I think that gets us across the finish line.
Okay, how we doing now? We got this going between a couple legal beagles and we appreciate it. We're all learning a lot, but you got to bring this back home now. Here we go. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman. And so taking that out does get a long way for me as far as, giving statutory authority just to bring any issue not raised by the parties seems too broad to me. But a quick question. So when you're doing a hearing, do you have the authority? You couldn't say, we're not going to make a ruling and order basically the parties to brief an issue. Is that something that you have the authority to do?
Mr. Hartsock.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, we did in fact in this case, we had a full-blown hearing and then we weren't comfortable with their interpretation and we had them brief it after the hearing in addition to the briefing they had already done. And so they were given a full opportunity to brief it. We could have even had another contested case hearing, but there was no factual issue at all. It was all about what the law meant. And so, yeah, we have carte blanche when it comes to ordering additional hearings, ordering additional evidence, requiring that the parties, we can make them do whatever we need to bring the case in the right format for us to resolve everything. There's nothing we can't do in effect.
Representative. You getting? Good. I think it's going to be key. I mean, the way this went down on the House floor, I mean, it's going to be key to have Representative Oakley in our corner on this. I think it passed 31 love out of the Senate or close to it. And so I think it's going to be really important. So I appreciate all your expertise and your work on this and putting Mr. Hartsock on the hot seat over here. So it's good. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, anything else to wrap it up, bring it home?
Thank you for your consideration.
We appreciate your service and all your hard work. And the bottom line is about fairness and equity to taxpayers, right? And the Wyoming's people. So that's what it's all about. Appreciate your work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, members, what's your pleasure with this bill? Well, let me back up. Let me back up. Are there any members of the public would like to testify on this bill? Anybody online? Okay, very good. So we'll close public comment. Members, what's your pleasure on this bill? Has it been moved? Who moved it? Nobody. Okay, Senator Pappas has moved it.
And second.
And Representative Oakley has seconded. No.
Yeah.
Okay, it's been moved and the second is by Representative Northrop. Okay, let's sharpen this up here now on discussion, and I think we go right to the addition to the existing statute, and that is Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move an amendment to strike page 3, lines 9 and 10, strike may address issues not raised by the parties and.
Is there a second? Been seconded by Senator Pappas. Okay, very good. And I like that change too. This is a layperson reading it. I think it was a little overdone last time. It backs it off a little bit. I'm thinking of our attorneys on the House floor. Okay, very good. Any discussion? All those in favor of the proposal, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Are there other amendments to this bill that passed the Senate 31-0 last year? Just said it again. Okay, no amendments. Let's take a roll on. Thank you all for your work. Roll on this Senate File 39, which is LSO 60 as amended.
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide, Senator McEwen, Senator Pappas, Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Block,
Aye.
Representative Northrup. Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Strack,
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer, Co-Chairman Beitman, Chairman Harshman,
Aye.
14-9, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Boy, we're on a roll. Okay, next on our agenda, and the last item on our agenda is state lands. And the Deputy Director, Jason Crowder, is here. And so please come forward. Members, you've been distributed a little memo that and we basically have asked state lands to come with us. We are the Revenue Committee about ideas that can help their, just like with Board of Equalization and Revenue Excise Tax, we're trying to clean up statutes and move things forward. So we've asked state lands to come before us. So appreciate you driving up to Casper today and welcome. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Jason Crowder. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. Here on behalf of Director Scoggin, as many of you know, we have a board meeting coming up in a couple days, and so she's busy briefing board members in advance of that meeting. So you have the B team, and I apologize for that. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we are a revenue generating agency. We get asked and tasked often on increasing and stabilizing our revenue streams. And part of those asks are what can the legislature do, or what hurdles can be removed to create more avenues for revenue generation, to remove some of the red tape, some of the bureaucracy, and some of the hurdles, frankly, for those revenue streams. We've provided this information to this committee in the past, and we provide largely the same information every time we're asked. The legislature in 2023 and previous sessions have done a good job of trying to streamline the ag and grazing part of what I'm going to speak about today. And they did a lot of work and moved the ball quite a ways when we talk about how ag and grazing leases are managed within the office and how to create a leasing scenario, or at least a leasing renewal scenario that's probably a little more advantageous to long-term use of the property and a little bit more streamlined and understandable. What they haven't done is picked up the commercial and residential use of those lands. And so that's what I'm offering for you all for consideration today. I believe LSO has handed out some opportunities for removal of those hurdles, some suggested amendments that clarify how or at least where some of the hurdles are as far as residential and commercial development. We've found 6 places where they can be looked at, and the committee can understand if those hurdles can be removed or not. The first is to increase the total length of a commercial lease from 75 years to 99 years. Right now, the statute puts a limit at a total of 75 years. Now, that's not to say that our commercial leases are all at a 75-year term. The Board of Land Commissioners has further clarified that to be the initial term of the lease only as long as the economic life of the improvements that are placed on that property. So you can imagine a lot of our commercial leases are ancillary oil and gas uses. So how long is the economic life of a tank, battery, and things like that? Those are anywhere from 25 to 35 years. They can apply at the end of that 25 to 35 years for another set amount of time based on the economic life of the improvements, but they can't keep renewing past 75 years. Wind leasing and all of our renewable energy leasing is in the same vein. The Board of Land Commissioners sets a term, but not to go above 99. The reason we bring that up today is not to alleviate any pressures on that end, but what we've heard is that there's some financing limitations available to folks who may want to develop state lands for residential purposes, or really the high value commercial uses like data centers and things like that, that if they don't have a lease that's close to that 100-year mark or the 99-year mark, that state lands isn't as attractive as some other lands. So we see a limitation there. The second is to clarify the minimum.
Just to clarify, so that would be getting financing for an affordable housing project or a large commercial venture.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And just getting the fund, because 99 years is kind of, in perpetuity really for our human world, right? Is that kind of in the legal terms?
And Mr. Chairman, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you those legal terms, but that's what we've heard a limitation.
Yeah,
is. Yep.
very good. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, the second is to clarify the minimum standards to build infrastructure buildings on state land. In our research, we found great statutes that talk about how to build private buildings on private land, how to build state buildings on private land, but not how to build private buildings on state land. The statutes are relatively quiet in that way. We've had some issues here lately that have risen or raised this question. And so we are trying to provide a little bit of clarity and understanding and firmness, frankly, for development of commercial or any other type of development on state lands. What are those lessees expected to build to? So we have sought guidance from the Fire Marshal's Office, the Council on Fire Prevention and Electrical Safety. They have adopted the IBC standards for minimum building codes. All counties who have that jurisdiction to enforce those codes have also adopted that as well. So we feel in the vein of clarity for those who are developing on state lands, putting that minimum building standard in there is important so that they know exactly what to do, because as I said, the statutes are relatively silent in that way. The third thing that we do is the other side. How are the local governments involved in that conversation as well? And so we searched, found the state of Montana to be the most similar to the state of Wyoming in this way, and with their creation and how their constitution is written. So we found an existing statute that the state of Montana has passed that allows a way for the local governments to be part of the conversation in how state lands are developed. And as you can see in the handout we passed out, it's subsection E, but it requires that before the Board of Land Commissioners issues a commercial development lease, that it seeks that input from the local governments. And it addresses very specific items, which are an adopted growth policy or a neighborhood plan, any zoning regulations, subdivision review, any annexation, plans for the extension of services, and any other actions related to local planning. Now, the issue that we have run into is that as we are developing state lands, we don't feel we are subject to local planning and zoning codes. But that doesn't mean that local planning and zoning codes aren't important to be a part of the conversation. And so what this does is allow that conversation to occur. It allows the Board of Land Commissioners through the Office of State Lands to have that conversations with those local governments and find the best solution for development that meets the Board of Land Commissioners fiduciary requirement, as well as the local jurisdictional important measures that need to be addressed. And obviously those are different from entity to entity. Mr. Chairman, the fourth thing that we have identified and put in the handout for you is to clarify the definition of recreational purpose. The Board of Land Commissioners is consistently getting more and more requests for use of its lands that are outside of the definition within existing statute. And so it's starting to talk about adventure races and target shooting and things like that. And so what we wanted to do is just increase the recreational purposes definition to actually what the Board of Land Commissioners is being asked to approve on their lands. So a cleanup measure there. Mr. Chairman, the fifth proposal for you is within statute 369103. And this is a conforming language, I guess, to what the Joint Ag Committee and the legislature did in 2023 in agricultural leases. What they did was create a process for valuing improvements when a lease is lost, not when the land is sold. But the same situation exists when the land is sold. So what this does is it mimics that process when the land is sold and how those improvements are to be valued if the parties can't come to a negotiated value. We would follow this process going forward. I think one of the most important changes is that we shifted from the term contributory value, which is how statutes historically read, to the term current market value. And that's the replacement value at today's value, not when the improvement was placed, but at today's value, less any depreciation costs and age and things like that. So that's just a conforming change. And the final one, Mr. Chairman, which is probably one of the largest hurdles to recreational or commercial development of state land, is how are those improvements valued separate from a grazing lease? But if an individual leases state land in an affordable housing sense and creates a housing development, or even just puts the infrastructure for housing in, how are they able to be compensated for those improvements when the land is sold? And again, this is specifically for those lease types where the purpose is to sell the land at some point during the development process. Historically, that has been the contributory value of that improvement as well, which is not an attractive value when you're putting up houses. The second, and if the legislature passes the previous suggestion, we said that would be the contributory value. But again, that may not meet an economic value or an economic threshold that would entice a developer to develop state lands. What this does is put that value at the market value. It allows them to sell that improvement on the open market, allows them to auction it, just put it up on the MLS or whatever means they can utilize to reach that market value, and they're not trapped into some depreciation schedule or something like that. And honestly, Mr. Chairman, that's probably the largest hurdle that we've seen to large scale development of state lands is how, if the purpose of that development is to actually sell the land at the end of the day, how are those developers going to be compensated for their work? Mr. Chairman, those are all of the hurdles that we found to creating new revenue streams from commercial and revenue and residential development of state lands. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Crowder, thank you. Any questions? Okay, what, I guess, my question, I mean, it's probably a hard one to answer, but how much are we losing out on? And I hear, we all have anecdotal kind of things, but you're in this where you're talking to people that are coming for proposals. I mean, and you probably can't tell us specifics, but maybe give us some broad examples.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great question. So we do get approached regularly about the ability to partner in an affordable housing scenario and acquire lands that could be set aside for when a jurisdiction is ready to allow for development of that, and to provide us lease terms on that newly acquired land that would be limit the value of the houses that could be built. Those things happen quite often around the town of Cheyenne and around the town of Jackson. I think one of the best examples that I have for this is just happened late last week. We have some property outside of Cheyenne that we've identified for the last few decades that its highest and best use could be residential development. But anybody around Cheyenne has seen the southern part of that city is growing in an industrial way. There's a lot of data centers being put out there. There's a lot of power generation occurring to support those data centers. And that's kind of pushing out the residential component. And I don't know if we're selling that land when we talk about it in an industrial sense at a discount compared to residential development. But what I do know is that the residential conversation is not being had because of the limitations here. Those folks are not coming to the table, and they're not developing, or at least telling the board that they can develop that land in a way. We are simply left with one option that would be industrial in that area.
Every town, a big topic in this whole state is affordable housing, and every town has got a state section nearly joining it. And so I've heard from people in different communities where it's that, and it would be a tremendous moneymaker for the state. Geez, those leases would be incredible. And then there's some in some recreation areas, all those kind of things. But so appreciate that part. And I think all these little things, I think this whole recreational, definition of recreation, it's changing wildly. Outdoor recreation, how it's just, so it's interesting. Okay, members, what's your thoughts? Anybody else? Any thoughts on this? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on determining lease rates on a land lease, 99 years. That is pretty etched in stone on grazing and, oil and gas lease sales and royalties. And how do you look at that versus, say the private sector looking at doing something versus the city looking for affordable housing? And can you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great question. The board has given us the requirement that all commercial leases have to have a rental rate at market rate. And so each application that comes in goes through an appraisal process or a determination to see if we can find comparables that would set that market rate. In our business, there's very few comparables, and a lot of the times we are the comparable. So we hate to set the market like that. We'll work with the applicant to negotiate a fair price. We might have a number in mind, and we'll try to get to that number if we can. But if there's simply no data, the rules give us a backdrop of 5.5% of the appraised value of the land. So the appraisers will determine the value of the land, set the number at 5.5% of that appraised value, and we'll see if that makes sense for an annual rental or not. And you're right, those numbers change all the time. And so each one of our commercial leases are subject to 5-year rent reviews, and the appraisals will do the exact same work every 5 years on every single lease going forward. And sorry, and one more thing, the board has told us we need to create a lease structure that protects those payments from inflationary pressures. And so we'll do a CPI adjustment each year, and we'll determine that CPI specific to the state of Wyoming with the help of other agencies in the state, and increase that rate every year based on that CPI. So not only is it a 5-year rent review to make sure we're on par, this year the CPI increase is 3.75. So each lease each year gets increased by that 3.75% as well.
Thank you. That was good information. If you're doing a transaction with a municipality for low-income housing, how do you look at that? I mean, that's somewhat competing with the private sector, I guess, if the city's trying, I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, but do you guys have any optics on how you look at that with a government agency doing business with the state of Wyoming? Thank you.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman. Senator, that's a very good question. We don't have experience because we haven't stepped into that world yet. In the conversations trying to lead up to if we can actually do that or not, that part comes up quite regularly. As a revenue generating agency, it makes sense that you want to have the multi-million-dollar houses on the property and not the affordable housing on the property. In that vein, we've talked about what can we do that would best benefit the municipality at that point. And that is one of the board's trust land management objectives. It's the third trust land management objective right there with public access. But can we help a municipality grow? Can we help them in whatever way they need? So it is one of the objectives of state land. And when you look at it on a cost benefit analysis, if we're only getting a grazing lease on that property, if we currently hold it, any amount above the minimum grazing fee is likely an increase and a greater benefit to the beneficiaries at the same time as benefiting that municipality. If we don't own the land and we acquire it with the specific purpose of holding it for that affordable housing, we're coming from a zero basis up whatever the affordable housing would generate. So that's still a net increase. But I think you're exactly right. That has to be an analysis done. What is the true purpose of the project we're entering into, and not just are we going after the largest dollar?
I think Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe I missed it when you were talking about it. So we identify state lands and we build affordable housing on it. My question is, does the contractor pay for the houses that are getting built? Who pays him and who owns the houses when they're ready for move-in? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Victor.
Very good question, Senator McEwen. Obviously, the state wouldn't want to own those or pay for the building of those. So the lease structure we would enter into would be some type of development lease where obviously they would own the improvement that they would construct. And therein lies the hurdle. How do they get paid for that improvement that they would construct? And that's part of the offering that we've given you here, is to allow them to get paid for that. But it is within the lease terms and the lease structure who would own those and how they would get compensated for. And well, we don't have an operating budget within our office, and the legislature hasn't provided us that kind of appropriation to pay for those. So that lease structure would have to be that the developer owns those, the developer pays for those, and that's the part of the lease terms he enters into. I think it would be important to understand this in the context. If he was developing that as private land, he would have to go and bear the risk of owning that private land, bear the risk of financing that private land as well as developing it. In this sense, the risk is somewhat diminished because he wouldn't have to acquire the land. It would just be a lease fee back to the board, but he would still have those same development costs regardless of the landowner.
So similar to any of your industrial, I mean, we have truck stops, we have all kinds of things, industrial plants on state lands. We don't own or finance any of that. We just own the land and take lease payments.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And it all goes back to keep our taxes low. Generate revenue. Okay, very good. Yeah, go ahead, follow up, Mr. McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not real comfortable with the state getting into a private business entity. It almost seems like you will have the ability to bully other developers, and the people living in the affordable housing aren't really getting ahead to buy a house. And we're venturing into something I'm not convinced is in the bailiwick of the state government. So my question is, do y'all think this is a really good idea? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
think,
Chairman.
first of all, you got to think about, and I'll start in on this a little bit, Senator. I think these are trust lands. And we've charged the state board, the legislature has, to administer those trust lands. So they lease them for all kinds of things, from grazing to truck stops. And they think they probably can lease them for residential. We just want to make it clear, and we do have some leases for residential already across the state. But I think it's a growing thing where, and all that comes back to these lease fees going right back to the beneficiaries, which are generally, most of these are school trust lands, but they're university trust lands, whatever they might be. But so that's the whole idea. It's not to compete with private industry. Private industry wants to come on and build these things. They want to use the land. But the 75 versus 99 is a hurdle, certainly. And I think bigger industry does too, because we've got some choice school lands that have given to us at statehood. So I think that's my answer to that. I don't know, you want to add to that, but.
Mr. Chairman, that's a great answer. The only thing that I would add is that we're not standing up a program for affordable housing. What we're doing is owning the land, as the chairman said, in an area that would benefit a municipality by having affordable housing on it. And if we're in that situation, how can we be most impactful to the beneficiaries, benefit the most out of being the landowner in that situation?
What kind of leases, what kind of industrial things, just off the top of your head, are on state lands right now that are paying lease fees?
Mr. Chairman, it does run the gamut. Truck stops is one of the far reaching ones. We do have cabins for recreational type situations, trails. Most of it is ancillary oil and gas, so tank batteries or development of oil and gas from neighboring royalty owners who don't have the benefit of that state lease. We have you had to ask me the question, so my mind went blank. But if you can imagine, we have land all over the state, in every corner of the state, very strategically placed in a 16 and 36 pattern. So everything that each corner of the state deals with, we have to deal with as well, and allow a use or a permitting vehicle for.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, very good. Well, we appreciate you taking your time. I know you're busy, be working on the road on the way home. Drive careful, and appreciate your service and come and visit with us today. Thank you. Okay, members, that about concludes our business. I think as a good co-chairman and myself, we'll get ready for that November meeting and kind of get this agenda set. We've got a few bills we've carried over. And I think on this one, I think this, the co-chair and I will work on this and see on this on the state lands, if there's maybe a little piece of this, I think sometimes we've tried to take all 6 pieces. Maybe we take one piece, and start chipping away at it a little bit, make it easy. And do that. So,
Mr. Chairman,
okay, anything else before the committee?
Mr. Chairman, that this did go in front of the Management Audit Committee, correct? And so I think Senator Biteman was on that committee. Were there any thoughts or discussion on it? Just would like his thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the final fate of that was. I know it came with mixed emotions. I don't particularly support this idea, and I don't know exactly what we decided on doing, but it's a very tricky issue. Obviously, there's the raising the leases from 75 to 99 years was a point of contention, running up against perpetuities and things like that. And then the whole idea of the state not just disposing of the land, but staying in and being basically a landlord is kind of an expansion of the role of the state government. So there was a discussion on that. I can't remember. My brain's a little fried right now. I can't remember how it ended up, but we did discuss it.
Mr. Chairman, but these recommendations, these are recommendations from the committee, correct? So no. Says suggested amendments,
Yeah,
not from the Management Audit Committee?
no.
That was presented to us.
Oh,
These are just ideas.
okay, I guess I said suggested amendments, Management Audit Committee. So
Yeah.
I thought it was coming from you guys.
No, I think they were shopping around for a committee to take up their cause a little
Ah.
bit. So here they are.
Well, management council gave us this, and then they gave a piece of this to.
Yeah.
Anything else? Sure. And then staff, anything else too before, come on up, go ahead, and glad you're here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee, my name is John Lehman out of Converse County. I'll be brief because I know it's been a couple long days for you. My comment is more of a question more than anything, and perhaps a directive maybe from the committee to the LSO as to how one would address an issue with regard to a public rural school sitting on private land. And this school district does not pay any lease on that. The private property owner has and continues to pay all the property taxes on that for that school to sit on that private property. The family does not benefit from the school. They have no kids going there and so forth. It benefits others. Is there any provision or rule or statute that would perhaps give a private property owner a little bit of tax relief from that particular scenario? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Here, I'll trade you.
Staff, do you have any that'd be something we'd probably have to research. I think, and Mr. Lehman, and are any of you on school facilities? 3 of us, we heard your testimony in Gillette. And how is that? You've been working with the local school district, review the lease, all that stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have tried to visit with the school district, not since our last meeting, but in visiting with the superintendent. It seems to be a great hesitancy to want to even visit with us about looking at that lease. Currently is in perpetuity. We just wanted to update it to be able to have these discussions. They have no interest in it. They just want to continue to use the land and maintain the school on private property. Thank you.
The Converse County.
Correct. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Commerce County.
Douglas School District, I think, I don't know if that's one or two.
Yep.
Okay, one. Okay. Okay, who's your representative?
Representative Strzok is one of them, and then of course Senator Boner. So.
Okay. Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lehman, for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit of the background on that lease in perpetuity? Just to take us through that real quick, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wright. Yes, this was put in place back in the mid-70s. The Lehmans had kids that were, myself being one of them, were wanting to go to that school. Well, not necessarily wanting, but were expected to go to the school. And the family was grateful to have the opportunity to have public education out in the valley for the ranching community in the area. And so it was under the understanding that they would provide the land. The school district would provide a mobile school. It was not to be a permanent structure because that school had been moved in that valley several times based upon where the need was. And so it was placed on there. We went to that school for a number of years. And then that side of the family who originally made that agreement passed on. I bought the property then. It was never, nor is it a recorded document. I just happened to find out the agreement that was in a water research project because there was a well on the property. And that's the only reason I knew anything about the document. Never came up in a title search when we bought the property from the family or anything. The school district knew about it, but I didn't know anything about it. So that's the way it's been. Currently, I think there are 2 kids from the valley who are going there. The rest of them are kids from town or surrounding areas that are going to the schools. So that's the way it currently sits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we can have, LSO, I don't know the statute, and if it's not a permanent facility and if it's not recorded, what can happen, but it would be nice to really understand it without getting into a big lawsuit for sure. So yeah, we can do what we can from here. So thanks for being here and tell us your story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I think, we're gonna have a school facilities meeting again coming up. And I think that'd be a good time. I think maybe if our staff can maybe have that update ready. And 3 of us are on that committee, so we can maybe get some kind of update on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's really I'm looking for, just a little bit of answers if there's anything out there, and then we can kind of move ahead from there.
I had thought at our last meeting that you guys had talked it out with the board and local school district, and everything was kumbaya. So anyway, that's where I thought it was at.
Mr. Chairman, I wish I could say that, but yeah, we're still battling on it.
Talking on it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, appreciate you being here, driving up here today. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
is it raining and back home?
Not enough.
Not enough.
No, thank you.
Never done. Thank you. Any other folks here, public comment? Okay. So with that, we will close the meeting and appreciate everybody's hard work and safe travels going home. Thank you. And thank you to Casper College. Thank you to our staff and all the folks who participated and testified and attended. So thank you very much. And the meeting is adjourned.